Hello and welcome to the Metapod, the Pokemon podcast. It revolves around the evolving meta. Another week, Sean, our first weekend of official play with Paradox Rift. Have you, before I ask and we talk about, all the news that's gone on this week, because there's actually been a good amount of cool news that's gone on. Did you play in any Paradox Rift events?
I played in like a local thing
Mm-hmm.
with Paradox Rift. I played Lost Box Roaring Moon. I felt like the deck actually did pretty well, and I went 2-2 because I was big dumb. One of the games, like I just didn't, my brain didn't process that there was the the tool on a Brute Bonnet, and so I
Mm-hmm.
declared my 2 targets for like knocking something out, and there was another Jirachi that I easily could have just knocked out, and my opponent pointed it out, and I'm like, I was like, yeah, I mean, like that was me being big. You take the win. Me being big dumb is totally a valid reason for you to win. Like he pointed out as I declared the attack, and I'm like, I appreciate the honesty. You got this.
So what you were telling me is you were 3-1 with an asterisk.
I mean, yes. The asterisk was also I didn't play the one game I lost. I didn't play a Colress for 5 turns or 4 turns. I just didn't. I went through half my deck and didn't find a Colress, and I'm like, I got real far behind, and I was like, that's not gonna go well.
That's the auto loss in Lost Box decks. Yeah. Just shuffle better.
Yeah, clearly. So, but I've played a decent amount of Lost Box, and I think the results will have some will back me up in the fact that Roaring Moon maybe just should be in Lost Box, but we'll see.
We'll talk about the LAIC metagame breakdown as well as some results, as well as what we talked about last week, going over our tier list that we made prior to the event. We're going to be talking about that, what we were right about, what we were wrong about, some surprises, etc., etc. But first, as always, we got to do the 5-star review. There was a review left the other week from Mr. Milo Cool. Mr. Milo Cool. I believe it's how it's pronounced. I love your podcast. Been subbed to you since the 19th episode. Love this podcast so much. So an OG podcast member.
Wow.
Coming up on 150 episodes. You must have nothing else to do. I'm just kidding. Listen to 2 guys right here, the most random podcast.
Amazing. That's what that tells me.
Yeah. We're definitely amazing. Anyways, speaking of which, it's always surreal. Again, watching the Latin America International Championships, it's always really awesome to hear the Metapod shout out in one of their promos, because they interview this person like, hey, how do you prep for a tournament? And they like mention 3 podcasts, Uncommon Energy, Tag Team, and they mention the Metapod, which is really, really cool to be alongside them because they have way more regional wins than we do.
I mean, yeah, and they're adding to it as the season continues with JW's recent win.
Yeah. Very, very cool. But anyways, we're glad that you really enjoyed the episode as well. And they also mentioned a recommendation as well. Do an episode on the best Pokemon cards to invest, because I would love to invest in Pokemon cards. I don't know. We don't have a bunch of knowledge in that, I would say. But if you want some recommendations, buy a booster box, hide it for 40 years. That's the way to invest.
I will say this too. If depending on how much money you got, if you want to invest, Japanese promos are always I think a pretty decent bet, because a lot of Pokemon is printed into oblivion now. That's not to say it's not great. I mean, I love all the fancy cards, but Japanese promos tend to do really well. You're not going to get like to the moon, right, in this day and age, but
you'll profit.
Yeah, I think Japanese promos are not a bad way. Higher buy-in, but probably worth it in long term.
I will say, if you do want to buy the special illustration rare Miriam from Scarlet and Violet base set, is $28 right now. It used to be, I think, like a couple months ago, it was like a $60 card.
Okay.
And on release, it was over $100. Yeah. So if you wanted a supporter to invest in, there's the one. But anyways, Sean, we got a bunch of other things to talk about in here. In the Latin America International Championships, as they've been doing lately, I realized I didn't give you the correct link, Sean.
I have the link.
I know, but I realized in the Discord chain that I have, I didn't paste the correct link. Anyways, Pokemon has been doing this thing with Twitch drops and things like that, and they've done this even longer. They've been giving away drops and codes that you can promote in PTCGL to get free cards and stuff. And so international championships, they usually do one. So they gave out an Iron Valiant EX special illustration rare in there. So we'll talk about Iron Valiant. You may want to build a deck here in the near future. If you want to build one on PTCGL, you can save some currency by typing Paradox LAIC in the redemption code to get it. It expires on November 27th at 6 UTC, a limit of 100,000. I don't know if Pokemon's ever run out. I don't ever recall it running out, but it expires on November 27th. So just do it after, Thanksgiving. When everybody's sleeping after Thanksgiving, eating the meal, just log on to PTCGL real quick and redeem the code.
I also want to point out, somebody pointed something out to me, Justin. Justin Basil. Anyways.
Our unofficial editor of
he's
the
amazing.
podcast.
But Justin, we talked about, future and ancient Pokemon when we did, some discussion on like what they were like last week. He pointed out Ultra Beast as an example of what this style, mechanic, whatever you want to call it, may be more closely related to, which gives a much longer lifespan, I think, to this, and I thought about that. I'm like, actually, it's a good example because you also see in the background of this Iron Valiant alternate art, you do see a future Tyranitar. We don't know what the name of it is yet. Maybe it's in the video games, and I just don't know. But I don't think
it's in the video game. You just don't know about it.
Okay, then I just don't know. But we see
they just don't have a card yet.
We see a future version of what looks to be Tyranitar, and so I'm like, yeah, that's a pretty big hint that there's definitely going to be more. And so yeah, I think it may be an Ultra Beast spiritual successor more than anything. But I just wanted to throw that out.
I do agree in that conversation, but there's a lot to be excited about in Pokemon. But if you're looking for products in terms of decks, products for the 2023 World Championships are coming out. The yearly decks that come. I think we talked about it last year when the 2022 World Championship decks came out. This is a product, especially if, you want some cool proxies, you want some of the stuff from Worlds, they got coin, pin, a small deck box that's not really a deck box. It's just like 60 unsleeved cards, but you get a pack of sleeves as well. I think in there. Is it a pack of sleeves? No, you don't get a pack of sleeves. No. Anyways. No. It's a booklet and a playmat poster. That's what I'm thinking of. Anyways, I'll go through this in official news terms. So Pokemon has revealed what decks they're going to give out for the 2023 Worlds decks like they do every single year. We know Vance Kelly's Mew VMAX, which won the World Championships, that's going to be a deck. We probably could have guessed that. So the second Mew VMAX deck in a row?
I think
because 2022 Worlds... Yeah, 2022 Worlds had one, The Shape of Mew by Andre Chizon. We also have Toward Reckless Gardevoir EX, the runner-up in the Masters division, which I think that one we probably could have expected, brand new deck as well. Very, very strong and toward a very recognizable name. We also have the senior division winner, Lugia V-Star from Gabriel Fernandez, and then Xiaotong Yan's Lost Zone Toolbox deck, the junior winner. So 4 different decks, very, very different decks, I would say. Very, very cool. Very interested to see them.
Yeah, and I will say, shout out to Gabriel Fernandez because he also was the seniors winner of LAIC.
Yes, he was. So really just on a tear lately, actually, Gabriel has been. Gabriel is definitely climbing the ranks of like all-time senior players, I would say. Looking to also probably, I don't know how old Gabriel Fernandez is, whether they're new to seniors or been there for a couple years, but definitely a player to look out for once they hit the Masters division.
Did he win the seniors division?
I'm pretty sure he won the senior division.
I think so. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think so.
Anyways, I think he won with Iron Hands.
Yep.
If memory serves me correctly. Yeah, because there's a video of him doing the winning thing, and then he's doing the Iron Hands clap thing or whatever. Handshake. I don't know what you want to call it. But anyways, these will come out on March 1st, so it'll be a while from now. We don't even have product images of the new decks, but definitely something to put on your list of products to get in the near future, because I love the Worlds decks. I think they're really, really good. You can't use the cards for competitive tournaments and stuff like that, but they're really good for, you know, keeping the history of the game, and just, you know, they could be cool proxies too.
Yeah, I know some people just collect all 4 of them, put them into boxes and sleeves. Jake is one of them. And then just like run back old Worlds formats with them. You just
I actually did that I did that 2 nights ago. I ran back 2018 Worlds, Robin Scholes' Zorark GX and Zorark Garbodor, and then I can't remember the person's name, but it was Buzzrock.
Ah, nice.
Yeah, I played against myself.
Last piece of news today before we get to the big news, that is LAIC. We talked before, I believe, about the Japanese shiny set that was announced. We also talked, I think, about how for us, like the shiny Pokemon, the allure of it maybe has dropped and died down since we got special illustration rares. But the speculation about, okay, well, when will that set come to America has been answered. And the name of our set is Pokemon's got to start finding better names, because it just feels like every time it's just starting to become a little mashup of previous names. But this one's called Paldean Fates. So if you remember Shining Fates, and if you remember Hidden Fates, well, here comes another fate. But this set is going to be released on January 26th. So around the same time as Crown Zenith last year. So this one is definitely sort of cementing, I think, the fact that our release schedule is getting very close to Japan's now, like within weeks. So, yeah, this may just be our new shiny time of year, is January, like late January. So maybe,
which is interesting that it doesn't come before Christmas, in my opinion.
Yeah. You know,
the holiday season.
You do wonder, like, I wonder if sales for this are, but hey, I will say, if you're a company, it might be a good way to jumpstart your sales in the new year, right? Maybe
it actually
Q1 look good.
Yeah, I mean, because people buy, you release a new set, but also there's Christmas money that people spend. There's yearly bonuses that people probably spend. So it's actually probably a little bit better than what we give it credit for. Thank goodness it's not releasing during Black Friday. Oh my God. You see the videos of people beating each other up for stuff on Black Friday. Think about that, but 10 times more with Pokemon cards.
Yep. Yeah, I'm like, I'm kind of happy that things have died down a little bit in the fall with Pokemon, but yeah, I mean, it's all the stuff we've talked about. 240 cards, a bunch of shinies, shiny EXs. The one thing I will say, there's a couple of things actually. One of them is that the shiny Charizard will be in a tin and not something that you will pull from the packs, which will be interesting. That might make the tins very valuable to keep sealed, but it's interesting they're putting something that would be a chase card like that not in the pack. So definitely,
Sean,
makes me think,
know that the special illustration rare Charizard from Obsidian Flames is going to be the chase card in the set, right?
Is that confirmed,
or a gold version? This is common sense.
Okay,
this is neither what it's. I don't even want to call it a prediction. I just think it's eventual fate.
Okay.
But
so
yes, it is
the Charizard
really cool.
that has, because this is well, I guess the question is, this Charizard that's featured here is the Terra
That's just like
type.
the full art. Yeah, it's just the full art Terra type. And see, this is how convoluted Pokemon is now. It's like we're debating on which type we're talking about. Yeah,
So
I'm talking about the.
Oh, go
The
ahead.
special illustration, the one where it's like more centered and straight up, and he's like, "Rah!" He's almost like T-posing in
Interesting.
there. And it's the card that we were like, this doesn't look very good. But then it started coming out IRL, and we started looking at
Yeah.
it in our own hands, and we were like, oh, this card kind of slaps, actually.
Now, Jake, I would like to throw you a competing prediction now that I've thought about it,
Okay.
which is we will actually get a shiny version of the other Charizard from the Pokemon 151 set, the fire type.
I think that's probably a good guess. I wonder, new prediction on top of your
Okay.
prediction of my prediction. Maybe we'll get 2 collection boxes, both Charizards, and one is the SI or Special Illustration Rare Shiny Charizard, and the other one is the Shiny Charizard EX Fire type.
Okay.
One of the Dark type, one of the Fire type.
Seems like a lot of products to buy.
Yeah, it does, but yeah, that's exactly what they want. But you know what we want, Sean? We want the best decks in order to get CP.
Yep.
We want prize money because Pokemon is doing well out here in terms of its player base and prizing. So we've got the Latin American International Championship results in here. And Sean, what section do you want to talk over first with the Latin America Championships?
I think that we can start just with the overall meta, right?
Mm-hmm.
Meta breakdown, and give a quick comparison to our predictions, because while it might be enticing just to look at the top 8 or top 16 and say, how does this stack up to our predictions? What you might notice is that the actual breakdown of day 1, day 2 conversions might tell a different story than just those top 8 decks out of 1,600 players. So, Jake, looking at day 1, I want you to give us a rundown. What does day 1 look like?
So day 1, Gardevoir was the most used deck in the room, about 19.3%. We're going off of PokeStats Live, which is Jared's tournament page that we talked about, because there's some very, very cool points. I did see, I think it was on Twitter, the meta breakdowns were posted over there as well. Day 1 is about 17%. According to the Pokemon stream, what they showed. So a little bit different in numbers, but generally what we can say is that Gardevoir was the most popular in the room. Charizard EX was the second most popular, different variations of Charizard, some with Pidgeot, a lot of them without Pidgeot as well. And then we get into Giratina V-Star. Giratina V-Star Lost Zone. I think we did talk about how, this deck has a resurgence in this format, and it did show in players taking it. Chinpow, Excalibur, Miraidon, Roaring Moon, all kind of really within each other, a couple percentage points within each other to round out the top 6 decks. And then you move into Colorless Lugia, Fusion Mew, and Lost Box Sableye Charizard. Yep.
So, that's day 1. I think my initial gut reaction is like, oh wow, that it's not so far off of our predictions. I think Colorless Lugia, in terms of the number of people who chose to bring that, was a bit of a surprise to me. And based on what people are playing online, I would say Roaring Moon being at only 7% was also a bit of a surprise, right? Where you're like, I'm sure a lot of people who play on TCG Live can attest to the fact that there probably was Roaring Moon everywhere for the first week or two, is what I kept hearing. So seeing it at only 7%, I can only think then that the Roaring Moon players maybe just got scared off by maybe the Gardevoir matchup. All those single prize attackers just make the turbo Roaring Moon just feel really bad to go into that. So, maybe that was a big dissuading factor for people. But overall day 1, I think those are the couple of things. But the fact that Gardevoir is at almost 20%, at least on PokeStats, is, I think, backs up our initial idea of it being at tier 0. And then you look at day 2. Give a quick breakdown here, see what changes, and then we can look at the conversion. Gardevoir still the most played deck in day 2, so clearly had success in day one.
But the thing about Gardevoir is
yeah.
it's at 25% of the decks in the room.
Yes, so a quarter.
So it's an even higher percentage.
Yeah, so like it will get to the conversion, but that means that the conversion rate was super high, even for the most played deck, which usually there's like a bit of an inverse relation to that. As more people play it, you get people of varying skill levels, so maybe the conversion rate drops off, but not so for Gardevoir. Then the top three really don't change much. You have Giratina, Lost Zone, and Charizard just changing places from 2 and 3. Chien-Pao and Rhydon, Colorless Lugia, Roaring Moon. So Roaring Moon drops down a little bit, but for the most part, you might look at day 2 and think to yourself, okay, well, it seems like just day 1 a little more exaggerated. But Jake, what does that day 2 conversion, what kind of picture does that paint?
Day 2 conversion really had 5 decks, all with very, very similar percentages. Number one, 21.88 of this deck made it into day 2. Colorless Lugia, Sean, had the highest conversion rate into day 2. A very safe pick. People said most of the people, or I guess I should say compared to all the other decks, most of the people that played Lugia made it into day 2. Gardevoir right behind it by 0.03% as well, going 21.85 into day 2. Giratina, Lost Zone, and then Charizard right after that. Again, very, very close. Giratina, Lost Zone at 21.84, and then Sablezard at 21.74. So very, very close on those. And then you have still over 20% Fusion Mew.
Yep.
So 2 decks really that did not see a ton of play in the event at the start compared to all the others, surging up in the ranks in terms of the conversion rates of day 2s. And I think this has a lot to do with, the people that chose Lugia and the people that chose Mew have been playing that deck for a while.
Yep. If you have a good list down, especially Mew, right? Like, I don't know how much Mew really changed. Now,
actually, there was a group that probably made up a good chunk of this percentage that did really well, actually.
Yeah, we can talk about it, actually. There was one group that brought the tech, the grass type. Is it a fusion Pokemon, I believe, as well?
It is, yes.
Yes, the grass type Aselgor, which I don't know exactly what it does, but I just know that it slaps Charizard, it slaps Roaring Moon. It's a single prize bad time for every
If
dark
you
deck.
move it from the bench to the active, you only have to pay 1 energy for its attack, 1 grass energy. So hitting a base of 120 on Charizard, on Roaring Moon, etc. You do what number is that? 240 damage with weakness. And then that doesn't even include, the 1 prize matchups that you can use Aselgor in. Xander Pero's list, I think he's the one of the group that made it, played a 2-2 line of Aselgor, which is more aggressive than what we've seen of Aselgor before. We've seen 1-1 lines, but now we're on 2-2s. But it proved to be pretty strong. A lot of Mews making it.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing where, like, I think there was maybe an expectation of a ton of Roaring Moon, which actually didn't pan out. So I think in retrospect, I think people maybe won't play as many Aselgors, because you think about it, and I'm like, okay, well, people weren't even playing necessarily 2 Meloettas back in the day. So playing 4 cards in your deck, just particularly for Roaring Moon, when it's maybe not as powerful as people were expecting or as played, might go back down to a 1-1. But still, really awesome tech to see. I think they saw it on stream day 1, and people were just like, this is crazy.
Wow.
Big brain. But what you see here on the day 2 conversion, as we said, Roaring Moon, comparatively, not a great conversion rate. Not a lot of people played it, and of the people who did, not as many of them made it into day 2 for Turbo Roaring Moon.
I think Roaring Moon's highest placing as a Roaring Moon archetype, basis and focal point is Roaring Moon. I think the highest placing deck was 90th in the event.
Yep. So, not a great showing for Roaring Moon, but really awesome showing for both Colorless Lugia and Lost Box Sableye Charizard, which not a lot of people played it, but the people who did, if you know how to run that deck, it's really a good play into a lot of the decks that people saw in this tournament. So with all of that said, Jake, before we get into the top 16 and one deck in particular that was not even on these lists that got second place, let's just take a look at our prediction. So I have it pulled up on the screen now, but Jake, you probably have it as well. I think the version I have might not have every deck, but in general, just going back over this, where do you think that we were wrong?
We were wrong about Lugia, I think. We put Lugia when
Tier
we
0.
did the two podcasts ago. We were with Jared Grimes. We all put Lugia at tier 0, and we had Miraidon at the top tables. I think both of those predictions definitely did not go well. I think our Chin Pao as well. Well, we had a lot of decks at the top tables.
Yeah.
So I a broken clock is right twice a day. But
I would say my gut says our top tables are actually like everything that's up there probably deserve, except for Lost Box Kyogre. I think we can. That one just doesn't exist anymore. Don't even worry about Kyogre and Lost Box according to this tournament. But yeah, I would move Lugia down to just top tables, and the only deck that's really in tier 0 in terms of how many people play it and how successful it is Gardevoir. It kind of sits alone at the top. That's my gut, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really good decks in the format. I think Roaring Moon, like Turbo Roaring Moon, I would almost put down to mid.
I would agree. I think Roaring Moon, especially after this performance, goes down to mid. I think it's just one of those things that, nobody's cracked the deck yet. And we'll talk a little bit later about maybe some other ways to utilize Roaring Moon, because it was shown off in ways that were maybe not super expected in this.
Yep. And then, I think we got to put some love back onto Charizard EX. It was played a decent amount. It had a decent conversion rate. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it's mid. Like, if we're putting Roaring Moon in the category of maybe overhyped, not quite ready for prime time, I think Charizard came out as actually a pretty strong, like, hey, if you're looking to play a dark type deck, this probably is actually the one to play still.
I would agree that it's definitely the dark type deck to play. I would say, what am I trying to say? I don't know what I'm trying to say. I feel like it's like it could be mid, but I'm not like fully ready and fully committed to put it at top tables. But I definitely think that maybe we underestimated it a little bit. But I don't know if it's worthy to move up a slot. It's definitely the best of the mid decks, and definitely like you can tech against it. Like I know one player was playing, I think it's Justified Gloves, the tool card that does more damage to dark type Pokemon. So the mirror match is really good. Your Roaring Moon match, you can knock them out if they don't attack with the KO anything attack. So there's different options that you can do in there that could present itself to be very, very valuable.
The only other card, I'll just throw it out there, and we'll get to it because I think we can move into the top 8 now and really dive in. Iron Valiant, I think when we talked about it, my gut was like Urshifu was the play. Just it feels so obvious. You ping damage and then you spread damage with Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX. But my opinion at the time was the deck has a problem with draw, right? Like you get bad hands, you get bricked. I've tried it with Octillery and like more of a Rapid Strike injury, and I've tried it without. But several people, I think, cracked a version of Iron Valiant that proved to be quite effective for the very few people who actually played it. So
I think it was last week I was watching Azul really play and put some key pieces together. And I'm not going to say that he inspired Noah Sawyer to get second at LAIC with this archetype, but I think it kind of opened the doors for people to say, okay, maybe the best partner with Iron Valiant is, ta-da, NTV.
Yep.
NTV, if you do not remember, and also don't try to buy NTVs at this point. They're way too expensive right now, Sean. They are, well, they've gone back down. They're $9 per, but on the other day, there was a lot of listings for like 20 some dollars. There was a buyout of NTVs. What's the
special illustration rare at, Jake?
Oh, the special illustration rare? That one is $26.
You know what, Jake? I bought 2 special illustration rares on day 2 for $15 each.
Ooh, Sean making some money.
I'm like, yo, this deck looks fire. And so I went and scooped a couple up because I'm like, if I'm going to buy singles, I'll buy the fancy ones. And I was like, because if you play the game long enough, you know that a deck that comes out of nowhere and does really well is going to get, hyped into oblivion. I'm like, yo, let me pick these out before they're $25 a piece.
And here we are now. In order to play this deck, you need 4 of them. So NTV, Iron Valiant, NTV being very valuable with the fleet-footed ability, drawing cards. We've talked about, the Burning Rondo, the Lightning Rondo, Suicune's, whatever it's called, Rondo. Doing damage because this format is so heavy on putting Pokemon on the bench, filling your entire bench. So Entei really maximizing on that with the Magma Basins in there. You can find and put your energies in the discard at the same time with Earthen Vessel. This deck playing a lot of interesting techs as well, like Bravery Charm in here. I think taking a note out of Miraidon. Seeing how strong Bravery Charm was.
Jake, I'm pulling up the list from Noah right now. He's second place. So, since we're just talking about it, let's just go over it. The second place.
Oh, I thought you already had it pulled up. Oh, no. I'm sorry. I can't see what you have on screen.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So, this is just for reference. Second place deck from Noah Sawyer. Total surprise. Keep going, Jake.
The Bravery Charm proven to be real valuable on not only the NTV, but also potentially the Iron Valiant, the Radiant Charizard, the Medicham, the Squawk ability, because you're only playing basic Pokemon in here. So maybe you're playing against the mirror match, which didn't really happen because there's not a lot of Iron Valiants in that were played at all. As we talked about, this was a big surprise for a lot of people. This deck playing your typical 4 VIP passes, a bunch of switching cards with Switch Card, Escape Rope, switches, your Fuster Booster Energy Capsule, say that 5 times fast. But one card I don't think that when we talked about it with Jared, stuff like that, talking about it with this card, this deck plays 3 Colress Experiment.
I mean, I guess it makes sense if you're prioritizing just pure draw. Right? Because, Colress, you have to Lost Zone a couple of cards. I think the preferred supporter in the deck is obviously Research. Because unless your hand is just all the energy, all your double turbos or all your magma basins, right? You're probably just going to be fine researching it away because your game plan is you have a lot of redundancy in the items going fast. Once you get set up, you're kind of good to go. I think so, but the Colress is just the best pure draw supporter in the game because it doesn't require you to give up anything. You don't have to shuffle, and it's just, hey, draw 5 and choose 2 to never see again. Yeah, that's fine. Most of the time with items, you're not going to see them again anyways if they get discarded, so cool.
I will say Noah Sawyer played against 3 different Gardevoirs in day 2, winning against all of them. So having a pretty good, it seems like, Gardevoir matchup in there, and then playing against some Charizards as well. I think going 2-1 against Charizard EXs. So again, with the pings that it's able to do and with the consistency of just drawing a bunch of cards, Squawk ability, Research, turn 1, Colress Experiment, Battle VIP passes, Forest Seal Stones. This deck can be consistent and be super, super strong. What I will say, though, Sean, I don't think the deck is cracked. I do think the deck is cracked. This was a fantastic call. This was a fantastic play. that's not what I'm saying. Is there's been a lot of people complaining on Twitter that Iron Valiant is a problem for the game and is bad for the game. And to them, I just say, you're just mad that you didn't figure out the deck first. And send tweet.
I will say this. I saw Jared, the person we had on the pod. He ended up bringing Chen Pao. And, I saw Jared's streamed match. And, my question about are you cursed, I think still holds a little bit because he got paired up against Iron Valiant, a different player, but someone playing Iron Valiant Entei. And boy, howdy, Jared could not keep a Frigibax on the field ever. It was just insta-killed every single turn. And like with Chen Pao, like, if you're playing against an Iron Valiant deck and you have a slower start and you only get one Frigibax down, that Iron Valiant is just taking it out every turn and you just never set up, right? So it's almost like in that matchup, you almost feel like you have to get 3 Frigibaxes down in the crazy world that they Iron Valiant kill one, Entei kill the other, right? It's possible.
Yeah, I mean, we're with Frigibax being 60 to 70 HP, there may be a turn to knock out the Frigibax that you don't even need to use Tachyon bits with Iron Valiant. You could just go straight into the Entei V. And to get that knockout, and with Yoga Loop being a thing, Medicham V in there, and especially with Baby Ralts, Comfey, Sableye, Frigibax, there's a lot of turns that you can skip.
I think it's very interesting that they've chosen to print Iron Valiant and Devolution TM. I think they're both great cards. But it's interesting to me that like right when it feels like they're hitting their stride with stage 1 and stage 2 EXs, and the fact that those EXs evolve from non-EX Pokemon, right? We're not in the V era. We're not in the, we're not in the era of V Maxes or V Stars where it's a big Pokemon going into a slightly bigger Pokemon. It's a tiny little thing going into a huge thing now. And I think it's interesting that like it seems like they wanted to design around that mechanic, and then they print a card that basically says to that whole design space, I'm about to come wreck you. And I think to me, like that may be what people's frustration is this feeling of like, I felt like we were getting somewhere with stage 2s and with EXs, and here comes this really annoying card. And the only way to combat it is to play Path to the Peak right now. But all of these stage 2 decks are abilities. So you're like, why? Why have you done this? So anyway.
It's a very interesting spot, and I'm curious to see where it evolves from there.
Yeah.
Because again, like we talked about, Iron Valiant Entei was not a very played deck going into this event. Very few people played it. But with its super strong performance and going second, I wonder how that influences the meta share in future events. And I'm curious how the mirror match goes.
Yeah. I mean, I think we kind of saw a bit of it. We can talk about the first place deck now from Juho Kalama, which was Miraidon. Miraidon taking home another big event, a bigger event this time almost in LAIC. Proving that it wasn't a one-time fluke or anything, that it is a deck that is solid. It doesn't need a lot of new additions, right?
I wouldn't even say one-time fluke. I think this is what, third time now? Because JW won it?
True, but this is the second event it's won. Whole hog, won the whole event. So, and it was a deck that we put in top tier, but I don't think it was one that we initially thought yeah, this is going to be the one to watch. People played it, but it wasn't played nearly as much as some of the other decks. But the interesting thing is, I think that this deck has a surprisingly good matchup against something like Iron Valiant, because you're primarily playing slightly bigger or big basics. That's your base. And for Iron Valiant, that's awkward because that one comes down to who takes the first prize rather than the damage pings. Your whole Iron Valiant play is kind of limited. And then what you saw in the finals that I watched was this weird interplay of both players not wanting to put the 5th Pokemon on their bench to not give the other player 220 damage with Entei.
I
and
will
or
say the thing that Miraidon has in terms of that advantage that you were talking about, that 220 HP, very key. Miraidon EX does 220.
Yes.
So Miraidon EX, like you were talking about, maybe has a favorable matchup against it because it doesn't depend necessarily on getting Pokemon on the bench or playing this chess game of like, okay, who's going to drop the Pokemon first? It can just go in there and just start taking knockouts.
Yeah, and Zapdos, I think, plays a huge role because Entei, for those of you who don't know, is the beefiest of the 3 legendary doggos at 230. And it's an awkward number, but you have Zapdos. You hit 230 with Miraidon. Now, granted, Iron Valiant can put the damage counters you need to make up the difference, but it takes a little bit more cards to do that, I would say. And then, yeah, the sort of the benefit I would say that Miraidon has in this is your energy acceleration is probably more consistent than Entei. Like, don't get me wrong, Entei's is great, but if you don't have a Magma Basin and your Entei gets blown up, then you're just, you know what I mean? Like, it's a one a turn is your most.
I think the difference is the Flaffy, because the electric generator, I'm not going to say is RNG, but it's basically RNG. You know, playing the electric generators to accelerate the energy, but the Flaffy can just consistently get you just another one from the discard pile to recycle those energies constantly.
Yes, I would say in most matchups, like in general, right, in the field, that is a big strength of this deck. In the matchup against Iron Valiant, you just don't play the Mareep Flaffy at all, because it is a but it's a target. It's a target for Iron Valiant.
I know.
Yeah. But like, so I don't know. It was just really interesting seeing the chess game of these 2 decks playing each other, because I think it really did come down to who got the first knockout. And I don't know if that meant who went second. I can't remember exactly the order of things, but it did kind of feel like Miraidon was always like in a better position. So if everybody starts playing Iron Valiant and Entei at your locals, just pull out that old Miraidon deck. Just be like,
I think Pokemon did actually recently release new battle decks, league battle decks with Miraidon EX. And I think it has Regieleki EX in it. I've been seeing people buy it on my timeline. So if you don't have any Miraidons, there's a good place to get your Miraidons. But very, very cool deck. It's got the bravery charms like we've talked about, and then it also opting for Path to the Peak. Very interesting, just because, like we mentioned, everything has abilities nowadays.
Yeah,
Path to the Peak, just a really strong card.
And I will say the real new things for this deck are the 1 copy of actually double turbo energy, which I hadn't considered. I have a Miraidon deck. I don't have a double turbo in there, and maybe my thought process is like, yeah, I'll just get Iron Hands powered up with, the generator. That'll be fine. But the double turbo does maybe make up for not hitting 2 on an electric generator, or having to play multiple generators, basically. So I see the value. If you need to hit, you don't usually need to hit 120 exactly. You're usually fine hitting 100 or 110, especially like Lost Box. Ugh. Any Lost Box deck, that Iron Hands is like, putting in work.
It's so good.
So I think, it feels like maybe this deck, because it doesn't rely on a stage 2 like Baxcalibur, and it, I guess, can be more consistent with Iron Hands because of that, it is maybe right now the better target for Iron Hands in a really big tournament. Like, you could always high roll and go Chen Pao and go ham, right? Always possible. But, Jake, what else in this top 8 caught your eye?
I will say Gardevoir caught my eye. This 3rd place Gardevoir deck in here. This is not necessarily something insanely unique. I do think there are some unique aspects about it, but I wanted to circle back to this because we talked about Gardevoir the other week when Celios Network Luke Morza won the late night with no battle VIP passes in Gardevoir, which some people thought, wow, that's crazy. This deck did the exact same thing, getting third at the championships. No battle VIP passes, opting for a bunch of draw. The Mirage Step Curlia, I think that's very important as to why you don't go battle VIP passes, because if you just get off the Curlia, the Mirage Step Curlia, okay, there's all the dudes there. And especially with something like Iron Valiant, right, Iron Valiant in format, that's a little bit more HP that you don't have to worry about getting yoga looped.
That's true. It's definitely like you only really need 2 Ralts down on turn 1. Because if one of them gets knocked out, it's not the end of the world. To your point, go into that Mirage Step Curlia, get a bunch of Curlias out. A lot less pressure, I think, on this deck with getting out as many Ralts as possible. So, yeah, I think that's a good call. I think the other card that we probably have talked about, but it's just absolutely amazing, is Screamtail. Just especially if you're playing it. Now, this list, surprisingly, actually does not have Luxurious Cape. I was a little surprised to see that because that limits Screamtail's damage output in this version to only 160. But 160 is more than enough to knock out a Squawkabelly, right?
I think the main priority with Screamtail, at least in this list that was piloted, I think the main priority of Screamtail is to knock off like little Pokemon that are running away, or to finish off an attacker that maybe you could only hit for a little bit of damage, like with the Shining Arcana Gardevoirs, or maybe you had to hit it with a Miraculous or a Gardevoir EX.
True.
Or something like that, or maybe Cresselia you hit with it. I don't know. I think it's more of a finisher and chasing the little guys out there.
Yeah. I assume that's what they're playing it as. We have seen some Luxurious Cape ones that can reach up to, a crazy amount of damage, but typically like 280 is a good number that you can hit with 14 damage on the guy. But yeah, I mean, overall though, a pretty solid shell that we've seen before. One thing I will point out is this one opting for more of like a more established list version of 1 Avery, 1 Worker, 1 Professor Turo, rather than I think some lists we've seen have like 3 Averys in the list, which is, it's a good card, but just sort of mixing it up with your supporters and playing pal pads. So if you really need to get something back or recur it, you can do that. So that's interesting too, I thought.
Professor Turo scenario, very cool card, I will say. I love the idea of comboing like Turo a Curlia to evolve a Ralts into another Curlia and get another refinement. Yeah. I think that's cool. It reminds me of the Scoop Up Net days, although I don't think it's as good as Scoop Up Net in that aspect, but it's still there.
Or honestly, taking down, if there's a Gardevoir that has like, even if it's only 4 damage counters, right? There might be a situation where you're like, oh, my opponent's going to be able to knock this Gardevoir EX out. You just pick it up. And then you just evolve something else into the Gardevoir EX. It's fine.
And then what you could do also is if you start out with that crummy Luminion or that crummy Zacian and you don't need it, well, you could just pick it right up. Or if you don't find the Collapse Stadium, which there is one in this list.
Yeah, I think Professor Turo is just a great replacement for Penny. Because it's just, to be frank, better than Penny. That's what it is. It's better than Penny.
Very cool.
Outside of that, I think the next one I want to talk about, we did allude a bit to Roaring Moon. Where has Roaring Moon seen any success? And I just want to highlight the evolution of Lost Box. So, Lost Box here, generally it's a pretty standard thing. Like, for the most part, your engine, the main cards. I'll highlight the differences. Lost Box had a lot more success at LAIC with Radiant Charizard rather than Radiant Greninja. And while I'm sure there's always going to be merit to both, it seems like the meta is shifting a little bit where most decks are now playing Manaphy. They recognize, especially a lot of setup decks, they recognize the threat of bench sniping. And if everybody's going to have a Manaphy, then it kind of negates the attacking potential of Radiant Greninja. And that's not to say there's not a lot of value in drawing 2 cards. But if you have a deck that has enough draw power, like Lost Box typically has, you might be in a situation where, like, you know, what's better? Hitting 250 damage is really, really good, especially if you can pair that with some damage pings from Sableye, maybe a Cramorant, whatever. Just being able to, like, make that setup, go in with a one prizer to clean up Lost Box Giratina, like a Tina, clean up a Lugia, clean up a Gardevoir EX, whatever it might be. And then you pair that with, in this version, a one of Roaring Moon. So, you know, I certainly did not conceive of Lost Box Roaring Moon. My version is 2 Roaring Moons and a Greninja, but I might be changing it after this weekend, Jake. But yeah, just having that one attacker that can knock out anything you put in front of it, no setup needed, is sort of one of those things that this deck, I feel like, has always struggled with. Like, you know, what is that thing? Maybe it's Kyogre, but Kyogre requires more setup. So, but yeah, Jake,
I think this is a very interesting list in here because, you know, we've talked about Lost Box Roaring Moon, but this one, as you were mentioning, really opting more on the Lost Box side of things and Roaring Moon as just more of a tech option in list, because with Radiant Charizard, right, the cool thing about Radiant Charizard is in this Roaring Moon Radiant Charizard list, you're running 4 dark type energies and only 2 fire energies. You know, Sean, you've harped a lot on the Radiant Charizard and how important it is. So valuable that maybe you play that instead of Radiant Greninja. So that might seem a little odd to people, but then you remember that Radiant Charizard requires 5 energies with no prizes taken from your opponent, which is not very often that you attack with this in that state. But if you do need to fill other requirements, you only need 1 fire energy to attack with this Radiant Charizard. So on a Mirage Gate, you can just accelerate the dark energies that you would use for the Roaring Moon. And then when you do need the Roaring Moon, you have plenty of energies to be able to accelerate into that as normal. So very, very cool list, in my opinion. Sablezard, as usual, opting for Claras, you know, to be able to get a lot of those pieces back. The Radiant Zard, the 1 fire energy, maybe some Cram Sableye action as well in there. You got a bunch of switching cards, Battle VIP Pass, counter catchers. This deck playing 2 counter catchers in here. Very, very cool, because you probably know you're going to go down on prizes early. So if you play down on prizes for most of the game, counter catcher is usually always activated and allows you in that turn as well to play a Colress Experiment, to play a Clara, to play the Roxanne, and not a boss's orders. Although you still have a boss's orders in this list, of course.
Yeah, I mean, look, this deck got like what, 4th at LAIC, so who am I to judge? However, the one thing I will say is it always scares me playing a list with only 2 psychic energies, because even if you think to yourself, oh, well, I have 2 Cramorants, I got a Zard and a Roaring Moon, maybe that's fine. But I just think to myself, man, you could have one awkward situation where maybe you get rid of 1 psychic early with a Colress or something because you're just like, well, I need the other cards or whatever. And then the other one is the last prize you take, and Sableye is just such a important attacker in Lost Box because it's able to get around a lot of weird situations where your opponent is putting things on the bench. It can take like little prizes to make up the prize math. I don't know, like, so that's the only one where I'm like, oh, I want 3. I want 3 psychic energies, Jake. I'm so worried. I'm anxious.
It's really interesting to see how this has evolved, and I think if I'm playing Lost Box decks, this is probably the version that I'm playing. You know, I've seen Pedro Torres hype up Sablezard left and right, and I'm sure he's excited that Sablezard is getting the recognition now. This list actually placing 5th.
Yes.
So just outside of top 4, but I mean top 8, they're still like what, $1,000 some dollars more richer than I am in that aspect. So very, very strong performance, I would say.
Jake, before we wrap up, is there any other deck that you want to briefly chat about that like either made a splash or people should be on the lookout for? that we haven't gone into detail with at any other point. Set reviews, whatever.
I'd say let's talk about Snorlax.
Yep.
Snorlax stall top 8 in this event. You're playing the block Snorlax, which is your opponent's active Pokemon can't retreat. Retreating is a huge thing in the format. Playing a bunch of other characters in there, like the Pidgeot, so then you never deck out. The Rotom to draw cards at the beginning of the game. Mimikyu Safeguard as a typical wall deck. And then playing a slew of supporters. I would say, quick math, there's 12 different supporters that you play in there. 12 different supporter cards. Not just 12 supporters, just 12 different cards. There are so many supporters. The 4 of Arven, 3 of Iono, Penny, Misfortune Sisters, 2 of Erica's Invitation. Do you even know what that card does?
I mean, yeah, I played against this Snorlax stall at my cup.
Oh, what does it do?
So what it does is your opponent reveals their hand, and you put a basic Pokemon that you find there onto your opponent's bench. If you put a Pokemon onto their bench this way, you, I think, move it
switch
to the
that
active spot.
Yeah, switch that Pokemon to the active spot. So very, very crazy. You play 2 of those, Boss's Orders and Avery in there, and then you move into your one-ofs, Peonia, Sydney, Giacomo, Silene, and Team Yell's Cheer. So many supporter Pokemon, but you're also playing very, very, very few Pokemon, only 7 different Pokemon. So the space is made up somewhere. No energy in this deck.
I mean, you're never going to attack, right? Like the whole point, I've seen versions that like talk about playing Crabominable in some form.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this version just saying, hey, you might end up taking 5 prizes, but the goal, the only way you win is if you take all 6. So we're not going to play 3 games. We're probably not even playing 2. We're probably playing 1 game, and then it's going to finish. And if you don't beat me, I will deck you out. And that means I win. So that's basically, and it's hard. I think, I can't remember. I'm sure there have been cards in the past, but you know, when Pidgeotto and Pidgeystall and Pidgey when that was
a deck, I know that deck really well. Yeah.
Yes. You know, we've had other stall decks like this in the past in some form, but I don't know if any of them have had cards that force your opponent to put Pokemon onto their bench from their hand, right?
We've seen it in Expanded. It was around for a little bit. Captivating Pokepuff. Is the card. But in standard format, it's been a long time.
Yeah. And so like you think to yourself, oh, well, I know how to play around this. I just, whatever my starter is, so long as it can attack, I'm just going to attack with that. I will not play another Pokemon down. You know, I don't need to retreat. But yeah, like you got to be wary of like your hand's going to build up, and you know, unless you just consistently Iono and just never draw into Pokemon, which is possible, your opponent's just going to start slamming things down with Ericas and Pal Padding
and not only slamming it down, but in that same effect, bringing it to the active.
Yeah, super annoying. So then you have Echoing Horn too, which you can get back with Silene. So like if you discard them, they can come back. It's just,
you can get Erica's Invitation back with Silene.
Oh yeah, I mean like there's just,
because Silene is any card.
It is, you know, it's just kind of like it's hard to avoid having yourself put into a really bad spot. There's not anything I can think of in standard format that turns off Snorlax's ability. Or if there is, it's definitely not played in any. I don't know if Empoleon V is still in the format, but like that's about it.
I don't know. It's a Battle Styles card. I think it is in format. I think it is E-Block.
I guess if you somehow want to play Empoleon V and have it as your starting
in your Chin
Pokemon,
Pow deck,
right? Like that's kind of it.
Yeah, Empoleon V is E-Block.
So like outside of that though, you don't got a lot. And then what happens? Oh, you play your Empoleon V. I guess Empoleon V will get through Mimikyu too. But like, even if you start getting through stuff, once they bench you, if they bench lock you with all Vs and none of them have Shred, throw that Mimikyu up into the active, let you knock out everything else, and just be like, pass. So
pass, draw, pass, draw, pass, draw, pass.
So yeah, I think it's a good shout out just to bring people's attention. If you are planning to play in any, I would say cups. It would be really, I think, strange to see this at a challenge, given the best of one nature of challenges.
I used to play Pidgeotto Control at literally any event.
Well, I mean, you might get absolute savages like Jake that bring it to just locals, not even a challenge.
Yeah, just locals in general.
Just my friendly locals. What are you playing today? I'm playing You Don't Play the Deck. So
I'm playing. I want to get better at this deck. That's what I was playing.
I'm like, hey, I'm happy to help you practice, but don't make it something I am forced to sit through for my games. But anywho, I think it's a good shout. But yeah, Jake. Any final words for this week as people move deeper into the Paradox Rift format?
Cloth is still the most fun deck to play. It did well on stream.
It did. It did win a stream match, and I sent out a thread about it too. I was like, it's happening.
It's happening. You and I both had the same thing. Like, I think I posted about it, and then Sean texted me. He's like, hey, this cloth match is happening if you want to post about it. And I was like, great minds think alike.
Yes. Oh, I love it. All right.
But either way, that was LAIC. Very, very cool to see the Paradox meta go where it has been. Bunch of surprises, but I think the game is heading in a decent direction. I feel like it was a lot of fun to watch and see how things played out. But let us know what you're playing. Let us know what you're enjoying in the next event that you're going to. Thanks so much for watching the MetaPod Podcast. The Pokemon Podcast revolves around the evolving meta. We'll see you next week.